Today we're going to be scanning up 4 sheets of color slide film using 3 different scanning methods and then compare the results. Hey there, and welcome to Large Format Friday. I'm your host Matt Marrash, and if this is the first time you're stopping by the channel, here's a playlist of our entire second season of LFF. And if you haven't subscribed yet, each and every Friday we're going to be here and we're going to be chatting something large format. You know, the idea of digital output is one that I think each photographer approaches a little bit differently. But eventually, you're going to have to take those grains of silver and convert them over into pixels, whether it's to edit your work, make digital negatives, make big inkjet prints from it, or just share it online. We're going to need to digitize our film. The options out there can sometimes feel like they're dwindling, but there's still quite a few, and I wanted to showcase 3 different tiers of digitizing or scanning options that we have for film, but specifically large format. Before we start with that, I'm going to show you the film we're working with today. These are 4 sheets of Velvia 100. These are actually from that same box of Velvia that I had for last week's video, but these were from when the film was fresh. I exposed these almost 2 years ago to the day and had the folks over at the darkroom process them. They're not all great exposures, but that's also going to help show the differences between the scanning methods that we're going to cover today. And for you darkroom diehards out there, don't worry. We're going to get back into the darkroom soon enough. We've got plenty of cold, nasty weather where I'm going to start focusing more on printing. But for today, let's focus on some digital. One of the first ways that we can digitize our film that if you're a film photographer, you probably already have one or have been considering one is a flatbed scanner. Now, next to the tripod, I think my flatbed scanner might be the biggest workhorse in my entire kit. Let me see if I can get her up here. This is my Epson V700. I picked this one up used about 8 years ago, and I have put a lot of miles on this. I've done so much film with it, and it's been super reliable. And I think if you're looking for something that's a minimal investment and pretty good quality, a flatbed scanner is still going to be it for you. But this is what I'm going to consider the most affordable entry-level tier. Picking up something like a used V700, V800, or V850 can set you back anywhere from a couple hundred to just under $1,000. And if you want to pick one up new, unfortunately, the only new ones you can pick up are going to be like the V600, and then it jumps from $200 at the V600 all the way up to $1,200 at the V850. A lot of those in-between options like the 700 and 800 are no longer available. When you are looking for used ones, just be really careful, especially like I just moved this thing around, and that's because I had the lock switch of my scanner engaged. If you don't engage the lock switch in the back of your scanner or in the head of your scanner, you could be in some real trouble with the components in there knocking around. This is a pretty one-time cost setup for scanning. Of course, you're going to need a computer for the digital option, but this is the only other piece of gear that you're going to need as long as it comes with all the right holders and area guides and your USB cables. But once you've got that, there's very little upkeep that needs to happen with a scanner. So I'm going to go ahead and get my V700 loaded up, fired up, and we're going to scan these 4 sheets of film and see what they look like with the V700. So a few notes about how I approach scanning with the Epson V700. I didn't use any external plugins or anything, just the standard Epson Professional interface that comes as a free download with the Epson scanner. There are a few third-party softwares that you can download for an additional price. I did add one extra thing that's about the same value as doing something like an extra piece of software, and that is this little piece. Anti-Newton glass. What this does is prevents extra scattering of light, especially on your very shiny base black and white and color films that can produce what are called Newton rings. This anti-Newton glass prevents that extra scattering of light from any little curls or unevenness and flatness on the film, and it just prevents otherwise good color scans from going bad. A lot of my early scans and even some of my more current ones sometimes have these little Newton rings, and just by adding this for your transparencies will save quite a bit of hassle when doing that. As far as settings go, I just did 1600 DPI, which is going to yield me a 190 megapixel final picture, which is great. That's plenty of resolution to go from. So yes, my 8x10 camera is capable of gigapixels worth of resolution, but as far as what I'm able to eke out of this flatbed scanner, not quite so much. As far as how the scans look, they look like I did them on my Epson. They're not the greatest things in the world. I know I can get better from them, but for anything upwards of what I would consider a 5 to 10x enlargement, flatbed scans are gonna be great. And again, there's little upkeep cost with the scanner as long as you don't break the thing or lose any cables. Your scanner is gonna be in service for quite a while. It's a technology that hasn't advanced too much. The biggest advancement when they came out with the 800 and 850 was they added the LED light source, which prevented the glass from heating up and also did not give you any time for the scanner itself to kind of heat up and get going. You didn't have to worry about the light source not calibrating. LEDs are just on and ready to go. So this might be a good choice if you're not doing all large format all the time, you have other sizes of film you like to shoot, and you want to get modest resolution for online sharing or prints of 5 to 10x enlargement. So for our second round of scans, and it's kind of a new middle ground option in the world of film photography, is DSLR or mirrorless scanning. If you're shooting 35mm or 120 roll films, this can be a great option for workflow and production. And if you're into photography, well, you may already have a camera that's going to be great for that. One of the challenges with large format film in this type of scanning is the output resolution. We know large format has the high resolution capabilities of potentially hundreds and maybe even thousands of megapixels worth. Can we actually get that out of a DSLR or mirrorless camera? If we're trying to do this in single capture, we're gonna have a really high bar on our hands. If you wanna get this all in one single capture on a camera with a decent crop, you may be looking at a $3,000, potentially even a $10,000 mirrorless camera to get that done. I'm talking about like a Sony a7R IV, which is a 61 megapixel full frame mirrorless camera, or a Fujifilm GFX 100, which is a medium format mirrorless camera, which is gonna be $10,000 body only. So it could cost quite a lot to get this in a single capture. But one feature that has maybe snuck under the radar for some folks is the ability of these cameras to do multiple capture. Some of them do it using the in-body image stabilization, or IBIS, to perform what's known as a pixel shift. So instead of the sensor stabilizing, you set up in this pixel shift mode and it moves the sensor a small amount between a series of bracketed shots, and then you use their software to bring things together. So for DSLR mirrorless scanning, what are we going to need to make this happen? Well, you're going to need a camera, you're going to need a lens, you're going to need a continuous light source, either an LED light table or a strobe that's already timed in and synced for what you need. And you're going to need some way to hold the entire assembly, preferably like a copy stand or a really sturdy tripod that can continuously look down and keep everything nice and level. For today's shot, what I wanted to do was do this with multiple capture using the pixel shift technology that the Sony a7R IV affords me. Now, I don't own this camera. I rented this one out from Midwest Photo, but this is a 61 megapixel camera, and by doing its pixel shift, it takes 16 pictures at slight different shifts and then combines those raw files together using Sony's software. The file type when it comes out is called like an ARQ, but you also have the ability to save that as a giant TIFF. And the output resolution is surprisingly good. You're getting about a 200 megapixel file. Once cropping's all said and done, it ends up being about 180 megapixel. Overall time to complete those shifted pictures was about 10 seconds for each initial photograph, and then once I got it into Sony's software, it was another 4 to 5 minutes making all my adjustments, but it was a raw file that I had full control over my color temperature, exposure. I had a lot more range in there than I did with my default Epson scanning software, which was pretty cool. I also had sharpening and noise reduction, which came really in handy when I got to some of the more tricky slides that had a little more underexposed regions in there. That added just a little extra oomph to those images. All right, so let's talk costs. Upfront costs for this can be really steep if you don't already have a digital camera setup or any sort of ecosystem for a DSLR or mirrorless camera. If you don't, I may not recommend this one because the final resolution isn't much larger than a flatbed scanner, but the quality is a bit noticeable. So if you wanted to do the same setup I'd shown you today, you would need to spend upwards of $4,000 to get the camera, the lens, the light source, and a copy stand. One way to think about big purchases like this is am I better off putting this much money into part of my digital workflow, or would it make more sense to just go out and buy some film? A lot of times the answer is more film, and I'm totally on board with that, especially because I've been rocking with my Epson V700, which I bought used initially for very, very little, and it's gotten me a ton of mileage. So this is a really viable option though if you're somebody who's already a photographer that works in digital or video and you have needs for something, that isn't a large format camera. If that's the case, this type of technology might be a slam dunk for you. Now, one option that I didn't illustrate because I felt like there was too much variability, especially because I'm inexperienced in it, you could always take a lower resolution mirrorless camera and physically stitch, but you would probably want some assembly to help with the moving of the camera to keep like the parallax and kind of weird distortions out of it. And for our final scanning method, I'm going to be comparing everything I've done so far to some drum scans that I've already had done on these 4 images. I needed these ones drum scanned because I had some opportunities to print these images much, much larger than I normally would from an Epson scan. 2 of these images were printed out at 60 by 80 inches, so almost a 10x enlargement, and I'm so happy that I got them drum scanned. All 4 of these were drum scanned professionally using a Howtac 4500, which has up to 4,000 dpi of optical resolution. So a drum scanner is very, very different from the other types of scanning we've dealt with so far. This is one that has like a true analog to digital conversion going on and uses what's called a PMT or photo multiplier tube. What happens is you're loading your film into a clear cylinder or drum, sandwiching it between a layer of mounting fluid and a piece of acetate, and then spinning that drum really, really fast, thousands of RPMs, around a light source that then feeds through that film into your photo multiplier tube. This is giving you a truly analog color signal that is then converted to digital. Because you're creating this analog to digital conversion right there for each little grain and pixel, you get better color fidelity and insane resolution out of the film. And because there's so much labor in the mounting and upkeep of these scanners, you are much better off doing this through a professional service. Now, as far as cost for drum scanners, they're kind of all over the board. There are some that are like, come and get it, just pick up the scanner. And some can be thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of dollars. And the reason for this is you're dealing with scanning technology which kind of peaked about 25, 30 years ago. This means that you're going to be chasing down incomplete pieces, harder to repair or replace parts, and compatibility issues with modern software. You may need some older computers to run this stuff, or a series of adapters to then have access to the original software. So if you don't mind those huge technological hurdles and high maintenance and upkeep costs, a drum scanner is an amazing option. As far as the 4,000 dpi scans on my 8x10 film, the 8x10 is still not breaking a sweat. We have 1.2 gigapixel, that's right, 1.2 gigapixels, so 6 times as much resolution as I was able to get with the Epson and the Sony a7R IV pixel stitched. That's pretty awesome. And I could still go more if I was willing to pay for a higher end drum scan, but I didn't want to go rogue just getting a few color scans. So that's the biggest thing. It's upkeep, cost, and your time really. With drum scans, I was paying a lot because I'm paying somebody else to spend their time upkeeping their machine and maintaining everything. And a good drum scan can start as low as 50 to 75 bucks and can go as much as 200 bucks, depending on what your final resolution is and if the service is going to include things like color adjustment and spotting. If you find a good service and you trust them, stick with them and support them. They have a lot to do to upkeep these older scanners. So opinion time. Of the 3 types of scanning, which one was my favorite? Well, of course I'm going to give it to the drum scan. I have oodles of resolution, beautiful smooth tonal range, and the feeling that I get from the slide is identical to that feeling I get when I hold the slide up to a light source or see it on the light table. It is almost pixel perfect to how I see it. So that's a huge, huge plus for a drum scanner. But just the same price as scanning 3 of those, so just 3 drum scans, just 3 of those, was the same price as I paid for that entire Epson V700. So value-wise, it's it's all over the place. In terms of what I was able to get out of the flatbed scanner, I feel like it was a pretty close range, but I noticed the shadows really suffered. You get a lot of noise because you're using an older CCD type sensor in that type of scanner, so when you try to bring up the shadows too much in the software and then afterwards in post, you're gonna get a lot of noise, and to reduce that noise is only gonna further soften your final output. All said and done, the resolution's roughly 200 megapixels, and I think for anything upwards of a 5x enlargement, so for 8x10, that's a 40x50. I mean, I have some 40x50 prints, but they're not something I do very often. So I think that's a perfect kind of, starting point, but also gets you really up there in print size pretty quickly. If you're going from 4x5, you can get upwards of 10x enlargements. So I think that's a very reasonable option. I feel like the DSLR mirrorless option gave me more dynamic range than maybe my Epson flatbed scanner did. And even if it doesn't have the exact same look, I was able to pull more detail out of the shadows because my newer digital sensor, it's one of those new Sony backside illuminated sensors, is gonna have better noise handling as I bring up that underexposed area. So yeah, it's my fault I underexposed the slide, but even as I underexposed it on the light table, I was able to pull up more information and keep it sharper after my noise reduction and everything was done. So I felt like I got closer to that drum scan feeling, but in order to get my cropping and everything right, I actually ended up with slightly less resolution than the Epson, but pretty close to 200 megapixel, which is still a lot. Like, you're never gonna share a 200 megapixel picture online. You're only ever gonna see it on like a, maybe an 8K screen at best case scenarios, and that's only a 36 megapixel. So this would be if you're gonna be outputting upwards of a 10 to 20x enlargement, a high-end giclée print that's gonna go up in a gallery. A 20x enlargement from 4x5, that's an 80x100, that's a massive print. And this option is still more expensive than 3 or so new flatbed scanners. That's a lot of film, but if you've already got a DSLR mirrorless setup, it could be a good option. So at the end of the day, I'm never gonna tell you which one of these setups to buy. I know I'm gonna stick with my V700. I'm gonna run that thing into the ground. But I think as these options for mirrorless and DSLR get a little bit cheaper, I'm definitely gonna consider doing it. Right now I'm shooting everything with a little Fuji mirrorless, and it wouldn't make sense trying to do like 48 stitched photographs to try and get something of high enough resolution comparable to the Epson scanner. It's just a convenience thing. So we're not there yet for my personal use. And then drum scans are just beautiful. The color, the tonal range, the sharpness, everything just feels natural. It's probably the closest rendition I feel to what the slide looks like on the light table, or maybe even what you're seeing here through the video. Can you see the difference? Let me know down below in the comments. If you have any other questions about this type of scanning, you can always feel free to shoot me an email, largeformatquestions@gmail.com. One more reminder, we have a little over a week to go for our first large format giveaway. Go ahead and head to mattmarrash.com. You can sign up for the giveaway in the LFF tab, and good luck. Thanks again for stopping by, and we'll catch you next week for more Large Format Friday.